You've tuned into Unpause Your Life with Dr. Callie Estes. Your access to success strategies and more to help you move onward and upward with your life. Listen in each week as she interviews others who have really taken their essence to the next level and truly unpaused their life. Now here's your host, Dr. Callie Estes.
Hey everyone, welcome to the show. This is Dr. Callie Estes, and I am founder of the Addictions Academy, the Addictions Coach, and Rehab Rescue. Welcome to Unpause Your Life. This is a great podcast where we showcase people who have done something extraordinary with their life. I welcome you, and I hope you enjoy all of our guests.
On my way, found a reason to wake up another day.
Before we get started, let's hear this short message from one of my supporters.
All the things that you won't do.
Did you know 81% of Americans would like to become a published author? Chances are you might be one of them. What's stopping you? Writing and publishing a book takes a lot of work and is expensive, right? Well, not anymore. For your next book project, or even your first, team up with Hassle-Free Books. They make it so easy to become an author. They remove all of the fuss and struggle and make it smooth and simple. And it's far more affordable than you could ever imagine. Go to hasslefreebooks.com and use promo code UNPAUSE to receive a 10% discount off of any book project. Get started right away and become a published author in as little as 45 days. For your free 1-hour book formula guide, which will show you just how painless it can be to become an author, head to hasslefreebooks.com today.
All right. Thanks again for joining me. Let's get started with today's show.
Took a walk down the dark road where they said that I shouldn't go. I knew the dangers of life.
You are listening to Unpause Your Life with Dr. Callie Estes of the Addictions Coach and the Addictions Academy. My guest today is Christopher Poulos. He is an attorney and the executive director of the Washington Statewide Reentry Council. Prior to his appointment, he served as executive director of Life of Purpose Treatment at the University of North Texas, where he was also an adjunct professor of criminal justice. During law school, he served at the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy and the Sentencing Project. Poulos has advised United States Senator Angus on addiction and justice policy and served on several task forces related to criminal justice policy. He graduated cum laude from the University of Maine School of Law, where he was president of the American Constitution Society and represented children facing criminal charges as a student attorney in the Juvenile Justice Clinic. Welcome, Christopher.
Thank you, Callie. Good morning.
Good morning. How are you today?
I am doing well. I'm a little tired today. I didn't sleep too great, but that's okay. I was working on good things both at work and at home, and was able to, thanks to recovery, which I'm sure we'll talk about, still be up at 4:30 in the morning and get to the gym and show up for work, even though I'm a little under the weather and a little bit tired. So all is well. I will get more rest tonight.
All right. Well, you've got so many different things going on at the same time. Let's start with what is going on with this policy at the White House? Give me some background, how you got involved in that, and what you're working on.
Sure. So during law school, I had the opportunity to intern at the White House. And as a law student, what that meant was actually work full-time in a policy type position for the Office of National Drug Control Policy, which is a component within the executive office of the president. So it's a White House component. And that's, of course, a cool honor for anybody to be able to have that opportunity and to serve in that role. It was particularly a kind of unheard of before honor for someone who had been previously incarcerated. I was in federal prison when President Obama got elected. and in recovery in federal prison while I was serving my sentence. I had gotten sober before I got indicted on charges that were related to activities before, obviously, I got sober. So I had this opportunity to meet Michael Botticelli in Portland, Maine, who was the previous drug czar, or as we affectionately called him, the recovery czar. And what that means is he directed drug policy for the United States of America, for the federal government, and for the president specifically. And I had a meeting with him and a bunch of other people. I was on a local task force in Portland, Maine on substance use treatment and recovery. And I heard him speak openly about, in the meeting, he shared that he was a openly gay married man in recovery from addiction who had been to jail for drinking and driving. And I had never really heard someone, especially in a meeting like that. I thought that at that time in my life, I was completely private about my recovery, about my addiction, about my incarceration. I thought that if you weren't in a 12-step meeting, then you couldn't talk about recovery. You couldn't talk about your past because of the shame and the stigma and because of the traditions, which I misunderstood at the time. So when I heard him speak openly, I approached him at the end of the meeting on the steps of City Hall, and I shared with him how much it meant to me to hear his story. And I told him I wanted to go to Washington sometime. And I had no idea what I was asking for. I just told him that, when President Obama was elected, I was in federal prison. I'm now in recovery. I'm a law student, and I'd love to come to Washington sometime. And that began a process which lasted a little over a year, but resulted in me ultimately getting clearance to, work within the Office of National Drug Control Policy under Michael Botticelli.
Wow, that's fascinating. So what did that feel like? I mean, here you are, you're incarcerated, you're in prison, and now you're going to the White House. What's that feel like?
It was very surreal. Sometimes when I first got to the White House and would go into, I had access to the Eisenhower Executive Office building basically anytime, at least during the day, that I wanted. I had my own White House badge, and the Executive Office building is part of the actual White House compound. And every time I would go in through there and walk through the gates and see the West Wing to the left and the Executive Office building to the right and go past the Secret Service, I admit I kind of felt like, am I really supposed to be doing this? Is it really okay are they on to me because there's so much, for me, there was so much shame and fear and self-doubt that I needed to learn how to walk through that, at first I felt a little bit uncomfortable, but what I really learned was that, in order to make positive changes, we really need to sit at the table, be willing to sit at the table and feel that we do deserve a seat and that we do deserve to be in the conversation and that we are worthy. So that's something I tried to do, was try to be as active and as engaged as I could be, while I was in that position. And it really was a trip walking in to the White House on a semi-regular basis. The Office of National Drug Control Policy is across the street, but it's still a White House component, and you need to have national security position level clearance in order to work there, and really in any capacity, I think. So the fact that, the Executive Office of the President decided ultimately, and the Secret Service decided eventually to grant me that clearance, really said a lot about the commitment to change and the commitment to progress of that administration.
Wow. So I'm assuming they knew your background. I'm assuming they did a background check because they, kind of have to. What do you think that says for addicts in recovery? Because here you are, you're in federal prison, and now you're in the White House. Like, it kind of sends a message like, even if you have a sordid past or things you've done in the past, and you're in recovery and you're doing the right thing, you can pretty much achieve anything.
Right. I think what it does is, and of course, not everyone coming out of incarceration is going to be, say, a pilot or an astronaut or an attorney. I don't know if an attorney is quite in the same category as an astronaut, but well, for me, when I was a kid, attorneys were my astronauts. You know, I looked up at my grandfather, who was an attorney. I didn't know my own father growing up, but I did have a relationship with my grandfather. And I thought, wow, that's really amazing what he does. And he did help a lot of people as an attorney. So what it does for me, I think, and hopefully for other people, is that it shows that we can achieve things that people may have told us are impossible for people with our backgrounds, or that I think even worse, maybe we told ourselves that these things are impossible. And, you know, kind of 12-step or recovery 101 is to avoid contempt prior to investigation. And so I decided to stop doing that in my own life, because some people told me it was delusional that I could actually someday practice law specifically. And, you know, in some ways, maybe they were. There are some states where you just can't practice law as somebody with a felony conviction. But I decided to fully investigate the matter. And that's what I'd really urge anyone still who's actively using, anyone who's in early recovery. Really, I think this applies to human beings more than just people in recovery or people suffering from addiction, but just to make sure that we fully investigate something before determining for ourselves that it's not possible. And so that's what I think this says, is that there are possibilities. I know a woman who's been incarcerated works full time in a trusted position for the Department of Justice. There are elected officials who still carry felony convictions. These things are possible. It provides a message of hope for sure.
I think you're right. I was telling you, off air that I had helped two people down here in Florida. One had a burglary charge, and he was having trouble with the Bar Association. And I had one that had a domestic violence charge, having trouble with the Bar Association. And both of them are now practicing law. So it is possible. It is possible if you, clean up your side of the street and get yourself together and do the things you're supposed to do to get where you want to go. Now,
right.
You're working in the prisons now, correct?
I am. My current role is as executive director of the state of Washington's Reentry Council. So there's a statewide reentry council created by the legislature with members who are appointed by the governor, and I'm the director of the council.
Wow. So you're doing big things. You're not just practicing law. You're doing huge things. That's awesome.
I am very, very blessed, very fortunate to be able to do this. And again, I think it says a lot for the government here in Washington State that they purposely selected somebody who meets the professional criteria for the position, but also has a personal stake in the game. And really, I mean, it's what we consider, in the words of Glenn Martin, just leadership. Like, it's just to have someone leading a cause who's been directly impacted by the cause. I think it's unjust to have someone leading essentially a civil rights battle who has not had any direct experience with it when there are qualified people who have direct experience.
Right.
So I think that says a lot about, and even some nonprofits don't do the best job about being inclusive. Pretty good in the addiction recovery space, like almost everybody, like on our Facebook network and everything, like almost everybody's either a family member who I consider directly impacted, or they've been directly impacted by, addiction themselves. Whereas some other areas like criminal justice policy, a lot of people come into the advocacy space solely from a academic perspective. And sometimes that's to the exclusion of people who have actually experienced the issues. So that's a big thing. And I actually think that the Washington Statewide Reentry Council is the only government reentry council that exists besides the federal interagency reentry council. So it's really cool to be part of.
That's awesome. So if you don't mind, let's talk a little bit about your former life that landed you in prison. What was that
Sure.
like? And when did you decide to turn your life around? Like, what was your drug of choice and how did you get in prison? What did you do you ended up there?
Yeah, no problem. I'm happy to talk about that stuff. To put it simply, I had a lot of privileges and a lot of challenges growing up, as do a lot of people. On one hand, as I mentioned, my grandfather was a attorney, so I was able to be exposed to him and learn from him and have that male role model in my life. On the other side, my mom was a single mom for most of my childhood. My father never played any type of active role, and to my knowledge, I think he's still in an active substance use disorder and battling mental health conditions. We just don't have any type of relationship and never really developed one. And my stepfather tragically died. He was a commercial fisherman, and I used to be a commercial fisherman too when I was still in high school.
Oh, wow.
And my stepdad died. His boat was struck by a tanker, and the tanker didn't report it. We think it was struck by a tanker anyway. That's what the evidence suggested. We never proved it. And so he died tragically when my little brother was 8 and while I was a high school senior. And right around that same time, my grandfather, who I looked up to, the attorney, he died in my arms from cancer. And one of my close friends got drunk at a party, got into a fist fight, and the other kid murdered him. The other kid pulled out a kitchen knife and took his life. So the reason so that was my senior year of high school. And
wow, just stop a second. That's insane. Like, you lost the father figure, your stepdad, you lost your grandfather,
right.
And then you lost a friend who murdered another friend. Like, that, the odds of that happening are very, very small. So you had a lot of trauma.
Right.
Wow.
And I'm actually learning now more about addiction, and I'm reading a book called Chasing the Scream by Johann Hari. And it talks about the connection between trauma and addiction. Mm-hmm. And of course, there are people that battle addiction, suffer from addiction, who have never experienced any severe trauma. That does happen. But the correlation, and I couldn't believe this, but apparently the correlation, I guess I could believe this. It was just the way he explained it in the book, is that the correlation between trauma and addiction is as strong as the correlation between obesity and heart disease.
Yeah.
And when you think about it that way, oh my goodness, it makes so much sense that people that have had adverse childhood experiences are, exponentially more likely, although of course not guaranteed, but much more likely to develop these issues. So I think in my case, I had the underlying issues anyway, and, didn't feel comfortable in my own skin. And once I discovered alcohol and drugs, it instantly provided relief for me. But when those deaths occurred, my substance use went from, probably like a 6 on a scale of 1 to 10 to just like a solid 10. And that solid 10 lasted for several years and resulted in several hospitalizations, overdoses, jail, institutions. And at 24, I made a decision to get well. I essentially could no longer find any relief from the substances. So I'd love to say that I kind of like saw this light and it said, you should change your ways because you're harming yourself and your family. But what happened was I just couldn't get the same type of high anymore. Mm-hmm. And I also knew that I might have some legal trouble brewing, but that was kind of like normal. I think that's hard for people to understand that haven't been through it, but like facing drug possession charges or possession of a firearm or stuff like that was like relatively routine. So I don't know that it was really that so much as the fact that I could no longer find that. To put it the way I like to describe it is when I discovered alcohol and drugs, whether it was a line of cocaine, a line of heroin, a glass of vodka, as soon as it hit me, the feeling that I can describe it as is like, That's the best way I can describe it. Everything melted away. All the pain, the fear, the anxiety, the shame, it all went away for a while. And I was able to chase that and able to enjoy that for several years. But it stopped providing the relief for me. And so at age 24, I asked for help, and I was able to, I didn't have any income at the time, so I was able to get into treatment through the state, a program that no longer exists in Maine, unfortunately. But I got treatment through the state. I got well. And then about 6 months into my recovery, maybe 8 months, something like that, I was indicted on 5 federal felony charges for conduct that occurred prior to my recovery.
Wow.
And
so you made the conscious decision to get sober and then got arrested.
Yes.
Wow.
Exactly.
Okay.
And that's what made all the difference in my life, was that I had gotten sober. I got sober from everything except Adderall. It took me like another 18 months to get off the Adderall. So I will credit jail, to give some credit where it's due. When I went to jail, I was finally off the Adderall, so there is one substance that jail got me off of. But before that, I was still taking Adderall, but I was also going to a ton of meetings. I had gone through treatment. I was actually working the 12 steps to the best of my ability, and started to develop a relationship with a higher power. And so then I went to jail with like a belly full of recovery, and a brain full of, the 12-step program that I was part of and still am part of. So that's what made all the difference, because a lot of my people are like, sometimes people say to me, Chris, why are you trying to do prison reform? Why are you trying to reduce the number of people incarcerated? Didn't prison save your life? And my response is that recovery saved my life. Simply placing me in a cell did absolutely nothing to address the underlying issues, the trauma, the anxiety, the depression. It was working a program of recovery. If anything, in some ways, jail and prison can interrupt recovery and exacerbate mental health conditions.
Yeah.
So I do have to credit jail with getting me off the Adderall specifically, though. I do have to give credit where it's due. It's now been, I think, coming up on 9 years since I've used any type of mood-altering substance, including prescription medication.
Wow. Congratulations.
Thank you. A little over 10 years since I've had a drink or a drug that I wasn't prescribed.
Wow. That's fantastic.
So those are two, thank you very much. And those are two very important dates for me. And it's why I'm a big proponent of harm reduction myself, is that, when I was still taking Adderall, I was allowed, I went to 12-step meetings. I didn't pick up chips because sometimes I would take too much of the Adderall. Imagine that. Somebody who was using cocaine couldn't take an amphetamine as prescribed. So I didn't pick up chips, but, they kept welcoming me back, and I was just able to, I still had a sponsor. And so, that was a big thing for me, to be still included and still welcomed into a community of recovery, even though it took me a few more months to give up the last of the substances. So that's part of my journey. And so now when I actually do celebrate my recovery and my anniversary, it's from all substances. I'm clear on that with myself, but I have very little judgment for people that have different paths than I do. Try to have no judgment at all.
Yeah. That's a big thing that's sort of, I guess, happening right now. Everybody's poking at each other's path to recovery, and mine was very different as well. My drug of choice was diet pills and speed, and it was doctor prescribed.
Right.
And then when it got yanked out from underneath me, I started, seeking whatever I could get wherever I could get it. And I tried the 12-step, and it didn't work for me at all. And I ended up in a yoga class, and that's where I realized the damage I was doing to my body. So I fully support, however somebody wants to get sober. I think it's excellent. And every path is their own.
Right. I agree entirely. So I did eventually, I had to go. The reason I was arrested and indicted on the federal charges were because I had sold cocaine to support my own habit during my active addiction. And so it was a federal case. So, often they do come later down the pike than the actual conduct as we saw in yesterday morning's news.
Yeah.
And so that's what happened to me. And I ended up, going to jail. I initially didn't have a private attorney. I had a court-appointed attorney, and it felt like this particular individual wasn't really willing to advocate for me. And what happened was I got off the phone with this court-appointed attorney who had told me that there was no way I could get bail and that I should consider pleading guilty. So I'm sitting in county jail, and he's urging me toward a guilty plea already and saying, forget about bail. We shouldn't even have a hearing. And it didn't sit right with me. It didn't feel right. Like he wasn't willing to advocate for me as my attorney. So I got in touch with my family. I got in touch with friends, and I was able to get the resources to hire a really expensive private attorney. And what happened was, within hours of me getting this new attorney, I was released from jail. So as soon as a really expensive attorney was on my case, it almost instantly and certainly dramatically changed my entire experience with the criminal justice system. And so had I been actively using at that time, I would have been like, cool, I'm going home, I'm getting out, and I wouldn't have thought anything of it. But the fact that I was, on my journey to recovery or in recovery at the time made me see all the people that I left behind in that unit, in the jail. And they had done the same stuff I had done or less. And they were all still sitting there just because they didn't have the privilege that I did at that time. And it made my stomach turn. It was actually that moment that I became determined to someday practice law. And that was a pivotal moment in my life. That was actually before I went to prison. I was in jail just waiting for the trial when all this happened. And then I ended up, having to serve almost 3 years in federal prison. But without that attorney that I had, it would have likely been 10 rather than 3.
Wow. So you really, when you say you've been on both sides of the fence, you've been on both sides of the fence, and you can see the pieces of our system where it's broken, not only in the judicial side, but in the addiction side. So that's fantastic. So you're in the right position to be doing the most good for the most people. That's fantastic.
Thank you. I really couldn't be happier with what I'm doing now, and the whole journey makes sense. Well, I think a lot of things in life make sense eventually.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like whether it's relationships that didn't work out, whether it's a job that you thought was the perfect fit. I found that some things that, sometimes for years we can't understand often, but not always do make sense eventually.
Yeah. And that's extremely accurate. And everything we learn, or every person we come in contact with, we learn something from. And it teaches us something else.
Definitely.
And puts us in the next phase of our life. For me, I started my career in a prison. I did my internship. I was the first female ever to work at SCI Rockview, which is an all-male prison outside of Penn State. And I wanted to work with the sex offenders. And they told me, forget it. You're going to work with the addicts. And I said, oh, how boring could that be? Not knowing how fascinating it was going to be or where I'd end up. And I wanted to be an FBI agent. And my mentor was ex-CIA. And the first thing he said to me is, you don't want to be an FBI agent. Sit down and listen. And I was like, oh boy. And I learned so much there, body language and how to detect if someone's lying by perspiration rate. It was fantastic. I didn't know how much of that I would need in my career, but I use everything I have. So it's invaluable. The tools you get and the lessons you get, you use throughout life.
Absolutely. Definitely agree.
Well, I want to thank you for coming on. And how can our listeners find you if they want to hire you or talk with you? Where do they find you?
If you go to the website for the state of Washington, where I'm currently working for, is www.commerce.wa www.ms.gov/reentry, REENTRY. And my contact info is available on that website. And then, of course, another easy way to find me and to reach out to me is I have a public profile on Facebook. I think it's how we connected. So it's a regular profile, but it's I have it open to the public so people can message me or add me or follow me on Facebook as well. It's just Christopher Poulos, pretty easy to find on there.
Awesome. Well, thank you for coming on, and I appreciate your insight and your great work. Keep it up.
Thank you very much. And I absolutely love the idea of, getting unstuck in your life. And what I would say, just as a closing for people that are listening to this and either are themselves still feeling stuck or, have someone in their lives who is feeling stuck, is to, continue moving towards your goals and understand that there's likely going to be a lot more no's than there are going to be yeses. And just keep working towards it. And the most important thing I've done, hands down, has been to be willing to ask for help and to take direction and follow suggestions for the first time in my life has really led to a lot of this stuff. So, I definitely believe we can define our own futures through listening, through taking suggestions, and through some hard work as well.
Awesome. Well, thank you again for coming on, and our listeners will be able to find you. We're going to put all of your links up on the webpage on unpauseyourlife.com so they can reach out to you with any questions. Great. And then we'll share that on social media. And you are listening to Unpause Your Life with Dr. Callie Estes.
Thank you. Take care.
Hey, everyone. Thanks again for listening. I really hope you enjoyed the show today. Head on over to iTunes and Apple Podcasts and leave a comment or review of what you think. Or contact us at 1-800-706-0318. If you want to be on our show, feel free to email or call. And if you have a topic, feel free to email or call as well.
Thanks for listening to Unpause Your Life. For show notes and more, head on over to unpauseyourlife.com.
Big shout out to recoveryinnovators.com for help producing this show. Thank you, guys.
I took a walk down the long road where they said that I shouldn't go. On my way found a reason to wake up another day. But they needed to show you all the things that you won't do. Find faith or religion, but nothing to show for it. No need to escape in love with my pain. I may be weak, but I'm alive, still alive, and I won't be bound by your mistake. No, I won't be your enemy, trapped at the gate. Bring me to life, put me to death. Just give me something that's just not so hard to believe. To believe. To believe. I took a walk down the dark road where they said that I shouldn't go. I knew the dangers of flying. Now I'm so far from silent cries.